That's significant because the North and South Tower also came down in their own footprint. That's also significant because the remnants of Building 7 was pulverized material. The remnants of the North and South Tower was pulverized material. In the basement of Building 7, they found molten steel at 1500 degrees. In the basement of the North and South Tower, they found molten steel at 1500 degrees. 1 and 1 still equal 2 as far as I'm concerned. And that's a fact that people can take a look at.
When thermite is used to cut steel, it leaves behind molten iron. And 2 scientists, engineers who were at the World Trade Center in the weeks after 9/11 reported seeing massive amounts of molten iron. And I found out that there was pools of molten steel found in the basement of the World Trade Center when they finally scraped down to that level. So that indicates that temperatures of a very high degree were reached through the use of thermite. Now what happened is that the steel was taken, and the federal government oversaw this. There were 4 companies involved in the cleanup. They took the steel to a dump on Staten Island, and then it was promptly cut up and sent to places like Korea, China, and India, where it was promptly melted down. This is the largest destruction of evidence from a crime scene in history.
I don't know how many people within governments have second thoughts. I think the Secret Services know quite well, and they have the professionals finding out that this can't happen like the American administration is telling the public. There are experts around which would agree with dissent. But to put it up and to bring it into the operational level for governments, it's very difficult because the American administration is fighting like hell against anybody who is doubting about their version of things.
One can see the story just being massaged to where it's consistent with itself, not necessarily consistent with the facts or with previous testimony, but so that it's internally consistent, so that it becomes the new myth that Americans and the rest of the people around the world presumably believe about 9/11. In fact, we still do not know what happened that day. We don't know who was behind it. And that has enormous implications for our understanding of what's going on in the world today.
The use of conspiracy theory as a derogatory, as an epithet almost, is something that propagandists have perfected over the decades, and it's a useful tool for eliminating articulate dissent and other points of view and information that might be inconvenient for a policy agenda.
I think it's very much part of the political culture it's ingrained in us that the idea that our leaders could ever commit atrocities against our own civilians is so morally horrifying. We just can't believe it. And I think that this really goes back to the way our culture has developed over the years. The idea that Western civilization has ingrained in it certain moral categories that prevent us from doing any certain kinds of acts.
People don't want to believe it occurred, but we have to go back in history. People in Germany didn't believe what was taking place in the 1930s and 1940s. Jewish people did not believe what was taking place throughout Europe. People in the United States didn't want to accept what was taking place back then. So we should look back in history and realize that events like this have taken place, and we better put up our safeguards now before it's too late. A lot of the people in the anti-war movement want nothing to do with 9/11. Well, ladies and gentlemen, wake up. If you didn't have 9/11, you wouldn't have the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq.
I think the main aim of the Bush administration is broken down or written down in the project of a new American century. They say we have to fight against at least 60 states harboring terrorism, mostly in the near where oil is situated or gas. In order to bring the support for this war, it is necessary to have this international new terrorism.
Most of the planning for the war on terror preceded 9/11, and you can really see the extent to which there was a desperation on the part of government leaders in the West, not just in the United States, as regards the impending crisis posed by peak oil. There are a number of studies which show that they have been aware of the peak oil crisis for a while. So the idea was that American foreign policy would be reinvigorated with energy policy, and the two would be combined. And it mentions the Middle East, it mentions the Persian Gulf, and it mentions Iraq.
This is very much not so much a war against terrorism. It's a war to secure control over distribution. And in that sense, it is absolutely no different whatsoever than the Rockefellers' move to control the North American oil industry in the late 19th century, which was not so much a move to control the pumping of oil and the extraction of oil. Rockefeller's genius was in seeing that if you could control distribution, you could control the industry. And the same is true today, extrapolated through the global market.
And the advantage of an American takeover of Iraq is that you get immediately physical control of the second largest deposit of oil that is left. Secondly, you are on the doorstep if anything happens in Saudi. And by having American bases, which already exist, of course, in Saudi and in Kuwait, and if we now have a string of American bases, which is what I think will happen in Iraq, you then have control of the Middle East. But that is what it is really all about. And I think the Americans, in order to do this, in order to extend their power, in order to explain to the world something which is more acceptable and that the Americans want to control the rest of the oil that is left, they needed some kind of facade, some kind of explanation, some kind of rationale. And for that, the enemy, after the fall of Soviet Russia with the collapse of the Berlin Wall in 1989, they needed a new enemy, and very conveniently the Islamic threat became that new enemy.
It's a clash of civilization. This is the theme which has been brought up in the beginning of the 90s. Sam Huntington told us we have to have new enemies. We have otherwise Western societies will not be able to lead. So you see this idea behind all this. And I don't believe in Osama bin Laden. I don't believe in Al Qaeda. I think it's all brought up by continuous faking of intelligence and propaganda.
So the notion of a U.S. war on terrorism is simply a fraud. There is no war on terrorism. The Anglo-Americans are backing terrorists exactly when and where it suits them, from Chechnya to Cuba to other points around the world.
The bulk of my research in my book, The War and Truth, concerns the role of Al-Qaeda as an instrument of Western covert operations. And this really does, for me, fundamentally undermine the entire concept of the war on terror, the entire view that they've given us of 9/11 and what happened. Because if Al-Qaeda is an instrument of covert operations rather than an enemy of the West, then there is no war on terror. And this is really the crux of the issue.